Growing up, Ava believed she and her twin brother, Andrew, would always stay together. The two were inseparable. Where one went, the other followed. Holding his hand, Ava excitedly pulled Andrew along, convinced nothing could ever come between them. But that changed the day their father called Andrew over. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder and announced that from that day forward, Andrew would begin learning the family business. Confused, Ava begged to go with them. She pleaded for them not to leave her behind. Years passed, then tragedy struck. Ava stood silently beside Andrew's coffin as her father coldly declared that Andrew had taken his own life because he was weak. But Ava couldn't believe it. Andrew wasn't weak. Yet in the middle of that painful memory, she suddenly heard his voice asking if she was the one who had called him weak. The words echoed in her mind, and Ava jolted awake. Breathing heavily, she realized it had only been a dream. It had been years since she'd dreamed about Andrew. She couldn't understand why those memories had suddenly returned. Before she can dwell on it any longer, her phone alarm goes off, because tonight, she has a blind date. Downstairs, Ava joins the rest of the Moretti family. For the first time, we're introduced to the people closest to her mother, her siblings, and unlike Ava, everyone seems to fit perfectly into the family's expectations. Everyone except her. Because according to her family, Ava is the screw-up, the one who never follows the rules. As Ava prepares to leave, she runs into the one person everyone fears. Her father, Alessandro Moretti, the head of the Moretti family. One of the most powerful mafia bosses in America. He warns Ava not to embarrass the family, and as she leaves, she can't help thinking about Andrew. There was a time when she desperately wanted her father's approval. Now, she isn't even sure what she wants anymore. Later that evening, Ava arrives at the restaurant for her blind date, but the moment she meets him, she already knows this isn't going to work, and within minutes, she's mentally planning her escape. Then something unexpected happens. A waiter suddenly arrives with 2 drinks, neither of them ordered, apparently. They were sent by another customer, a mysterious man sitting elsewhere in the restaurant. At first, Ava tries to ignore it and focus on the conversation, but every time she looks away, she finds herself glancing back at him. And for some reason, she can't stop noticing him. Meanwhile, her date decides this is the perfect time to discuss a future marriage alliance between their families. Ava politely rejects the idea. Then, without wasting another second, she gets up and leaves. Because at this point, she'd rather deal with Angie's anger than spend another minute sitting there. As Ava storms through the hallway, she makes a decision. She's probably going to get yelled at by Angie anyway, so she might as well enjoy the rest of her night first. But before she can leave, her heel suddenly slips, and just as she's about to fall, a strong arm wraps around her waist from behind and catches her, then slowly turns around to see who it is, because standing behind her is the same mysterious stranger from the restaurant. Then he leans in slightly and asks a simple question. How about a date with me instead? And just like that, Ava's night becomes a whole lot more interesting. Instead of going home, she goes with the mysterious stranger from the restaurant. And the second they're alone together, the tension completely explodes. The guy immediately pins her against the wall and kisses her like he already owns the room. But Ava notices something terrifying almost instantly. A gun, hidden on his body. Ava immediately pushes him away and demands to know why he's carrying a weapon. But instead of panicking, the stranger calmly removes the gun and sets it aside like it's completely normal. Then he looks her dead in the eyes and says something that completely catches her off guard. You're safe as long as you're with me. And somehow that only makes him even more dangerous. Instead of leaving, Ava stays, and from that moment on, the night spirals completely out of control. Later, after showering, Ava realizes the stranger disappeared. But before she can even react, he suddenly grabs her from behind. After everything that happened, he never even asked for her name. But Ava has no intention of telling him who she really is. So instead, she gives him a fake name. Juliet? Then I guess that makes me Romeo. She makes it clear this is only a one-night thing, because according to him, most women change their minds by morning. That challenge completely flips the mood, and suddenly Ava decides she's done playing defense. And what starts as attraction quickly turns into a battle of dominance between 2 people who are both hiding dangerous secrets. The next morning, Ava wakes up covered in marks from the night before, but when she sees the stranger sleeping peacefully beside her, she can't help thinking how different he looks now. Last night, he felt like the devil himself. So before leaving, she writes him a note, basically treating him like the one-night stand. And when the stranger finally wakes up, he is completely stunned. Not because she left, but because no woman has ever treated him this way before. Instead of getting angry, he smirks. Then immediately calls a private investigator. Because now he wants to find the mysterious girl who called herself Juliet. The only problem? Everything she told him was probably fake. Still, he gives the investigator one order: track her down. And as he leaves the hotel surrounded by bodyguards and luxury cars, we finally realize something terrifying. Ava may have just spent the night with someone every bit as dangerous as her own mafia family. After spending the night with a complete stranger, Ava finally realizes something terrifying. He understands her better than her own family. But the moment she returns home, that feeling disappears instantly, because her mafia boss father slaps her across the face for disappearing all night. Then things get even worse. He places Ava on complete lockdown, and standing there alone inside that massive mansion, Ava realizes something heartbreaking. She felt safer with a dangerous stranger than inside her own home. But while Ava is trapped with her family, the man she spent the night with is dealing with problems of his own. Because this mysterious stranger isn't just some random flirt. His name is Nick Caponelli, heir to one of the most powerful mafia families in New York, a man feared across the entire underworld as the Young Lion. And right now, Nick has become completely obsessed with finding the girl who disappeared after one night. The problem? Ava gave him a fake name. Even Nick's assistants start making fun of him, because apparently the great Nick Caponelli got paid after a one-night stand. But before Nick can continue searching for Ava, his father suddenly reveals something far more dangerous. There's a rat inside the Caponelli organization. Someone has been secretly stealing from the family's shipments, and now Nick has been ordered to find them. The final scene cuts to a rooftop high above the city. Helicopters unload shipments while armed men guard the entire operation. And standing there in the shadows is a man we've never seen before. Someone close enough to the Caponelli family to steal from them without getting caught. He stares at Ava's photo on his phone, then slowly smiles. And tonight, after tearing apart half the city trying to find her, he finally sees her again, standing on a yacht completely cornered by the man who almost destroyed her life. But what nobody realizes yet is that this single moment is about to change everything. The chapter opens with burning cars scattered across the street while smoke fills the night sky. And right in the middle of the chaos stands Nick Caponelli, completely calm. That alone tells you how terrifying this man really is. A few moments later, Leo arrives with information about the people responsible for the recent attacks. Apparently, they finally caught them, but there's a problem. The men they captured were just disposable pawns, meaning the real mastermind is still hiding somewhere in the city. Then Leo mentions something suspicious. A rich playboy named Kyle Archer has been throwing massive yacht parties every night. The second Nick hears that, he immediately decides they're going, almost like instinct is pulling him there. And honestly, he has no idea how right he is. Before they leave, Leo starts roasting Nick. Apparently, this man has spent an entire month obsessively searching for a woman named Juliet. Nick has literally been looking through photos of almost every woman in New York trying to find her. At this point, Leo genuinely thinks he's losing his mind, but Nick suddenly gets serious. He says this isn't curiosity anymore, and the way he says it. Yeah. This man is absolutely gone. Then the chapter cuts to the girl he's been searching for. Ava has been locked inside her family mansion for over a month. Not because she committed a crime. Not because she hurt someone, but because she disappeared for one night. That's how terrifying her family is. We see Ava quietly studying alone, while remembering how desperately she begged her father to let her out. She apologized, cried, promised to behave, nothing worked, and then we learn something even worse. The last time she disappointed her father, she was locked away for 6 months, because rumors spread through New York claiming the youngest daughter of the Moretti family was addicted to drugs. One scandal nearly destroyed the family reputation, and ever since then, Ava has basically been treated like a prisoner. But right when the chapter starts feeling depressing, Bella arrives, and this girl is pure chaos. Bella immediately drags Ava out of her misery, and convinces her to sneak out for the night. Ava obviously refuses at first. Honestly, she looks terrified just thinking about leaving the mansion again. Because the last time she disobeyed her family, they locked her away for months, but Bella keeps pushing until Ava finally gives in. And then Bella reveals where they're going. A yacht party. The exact same place Nick is heading to. But before that can even happen, someone from Ava's past suddenly appears and turns the entire night into a nightmare. The yacht is packed with rich elites, flashing lights, expensive drinks, and shady people everywhere. Bella is having the time of her life. Meanwhile, Ava looks like she regrets every decision she's made tonight. Then suddenly, someone steps in front of her, Jimmy, her ex-boyfriend. And the second Ava sees him, her entire expression changes. You can instantly tell this guy traumatized her. Jimmy starts mocking her immediately. He brings up her addiction. Mocks the way she used to beg for drugs, then this psychopath actually offers her another hit. Like he wants to drag her right back into the nightmare she escaped from. And honestly, this scene was hard to watch. Because for a moment, Ava almost breaks. But Jimmy doesn't stop. Instead, he grabs her, and that's when someone crushes his wrist from behind. Right after stepping onto the yacht, Nick suddenly notices someone in the crowd. Ava. For a moment, he just stares at her, almost like he can't believe she's real. But before he can even approach her, he notices Jimmy grabbing her arm, and instantly, Nick starts walking toward them. Meanwhile, Jimmy keeps talking, completely unaware of who's approaching him. Ava tries pulling away again, but Jimmy grabs her even harder, and then a hand suddenly crushes his wrist. Jimmy turns around and immediately freezes, because standing behind him is Nick. And then Nick says, "That's no way to treat a lady." But something tells me Nick finally finding Ava isn't the beginning of a love story. It's the beginning of absolute chaos. The chapter starts exactly where the last one ended. Jimmy grabs Ava's arm, and suddenly someone crushes his wrist. Then a calm voice says, "That's no way to treat a lady." Jimmy turns around and standing behind him is Nick, completely calm. At first, Jimmy still tries acting tough, but then he swings at Nick, which turns out to be the worst mistake possible, because Nick immediately pulls out a gun right there on the yacht. In front of everyone, no hesitation. And suddenly, Jimmy realizes this man genuinely does not care who's watching. After threatening Ava one last time, Jimmy finally runs away, leaving Ava completely alone with Nick. And the second these two look at each other, again, the entire atmosphere changes. Nick casually admits he's been searching all over New York just to see her again. Then Ava nervously asks why he wanted to find her, and Nick immediately reminds her that she literally paid money to sleep with him. The way this chapter suddenly shifts from tension into awkward flirting is actually hilarious. Ava looks completely embarrassed while Nick keeps teasing her non-stop. Nick suddenly grabs Ava's hand, then casually asks her out on a date. And for a second, Ava genuinely looks tempted, but then Ava suddenly remembers Jimmy. The manipulation, the addiction, the way she completely destroyed herself trying to love the wrong person, and slowly, she reminds him that their relationship was only supposed to be a one-night stand, nothing more. Because deep down, she's just terrified of repeating the same mistakes again. Meanwhile, Nick stands there silently watching her walk away. And for the first time in the series, this man genuinely looks disappointed. But before the chapter can even process that emotional damage, the chapter suddenly cuts to a tense mafia meeting discussing the Russians aggressively expanding their territory. One man proposes forming an alliance before things spiral out of control, but Nick's father clearly doesn't trust him at all. The tension gets so bad that multiple people literally point guns at each other during the meeting. Then suddenly the man proposes something even crazier. A marriage alliance. And the second those words are spoken, meanwhile, somewhere else, the chapter cuts to a horrifying blonde man torturing someone while casually talking about the alliance proposal. And honestly, this guy feels terrifying. Because unlike Nick, he looks completely unstable. At first, Nick thought she was just another beautiful woman. Then she disappeared. A month later, he still couldn't get her out of his head. And the more he tried to forget her, the worse it got. Nick Caponelli met someone he couldn't understand, and that might have been the biggest mistake either of them could make. The chapter opens with Nick sitting alone at a bar, thinking back to the first night he met Ava. At first, it wasn't anything special, just a random woman he happened to notice. But the more he watched her, the harder she became to ignore. She wasn't acting like everyone else. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, and when someone tried helping her, she made it clear she didn't need saving. And from that point on, he couldn't stop looking at her. One moment, Ava seemed fragile. The next moment, she was fearless. Sometimes she looked completely lost. Nothing about her made sense, and somehow that only made Nick more interested. But then the chapter reveals something even crazier. Nick isn't just remembering her, he's been actively searching for her for an entire month, looking through photos. And according to everyone around him, he's completely lost his mind. After waking up the morning after their encounter, Nick discovers Ava left before he could even speak to her. All she left behind was a note and a stack of cash. The realization hits immediately. She basically treated him like a gigolo. Nick takes that personally. Most women chase him. Ava did the exact opposite. The story then returns to the yacht party. The same night, Nick finally finds her again. But the second he gets closer, he realizes something is different. When Ava tries to walk away, Nick stops her, not because he wants another one-night stand, but because he genuinely wants to know her. And judging by Ava's reaction, that was the last thing she expected him to say. Nick then hands Ava his number and tells her to call anytime. Then he finally walks away, leaving Ava completely speechless. And that's when the chapter delivers its most important moment. Because for the first time, everything becomes clear to Nick. He wants her, but Ava doesn't want him. And somehow that only makes her harder to forget. Because what started as curiosity has now become something much more dangerous. As Ava walks out of class, a bright red sports car pulls up in front of the campus. Students immediately stop to stare, and leaning against the car is Nick, completely shocked. Ava demands to know how he even found her. Nick casually smiles. "I looked up your name." Before Ava can even react, the students around them start whispering, completely embarrassed. She reminds Nick that he told her to call him. Nick simply smiles. "I told you to call. I never said I wouldn't come find you." Ava gives up trying to argue. She shoves him toward the car. just to escape the growing crowd. The moment they get inside, Nick notices she clearly doesn't want to be there. He jokingly admits he actually had to work up the courage to come see her. Ava rolls her eyes to her. He still seems like nothing more than a shameless playboy. As they drive away, Nick finally introduces himself properly, then casually starts listing everything he knows about her, even the university she attends. Ava immediately panics. Thankfully, he still doesn't know she's actually Ava Moretti. She warns him that her father is an incredibly dangerous man. But instead of getting intimidated, Nick just laughs. Eventually, they arrive at a horse ranch. The moment Ava sees the horses, her entire mood changes. Nick explains that this is his family's vacation home, a place he used to visit with his younger sibling whenever life became overwhelming. One horse immediately catches Ava's attention. Nick warns her that it's known for having a terrible temper. But the moment Ava gently strokes it, the horse instantly calms down. Even Nick looks surprised. Seeing how comfortable she is, he asks if she'd like to ride. Ava excitedly agrees, although she assumes they'll ride separately. Nick has other plans. Since she's never ridden before, he insists they'll ride together. Before she can complain, the horse suddenly takes off. Ava panics, but Nick calmly reassures her, "You'll always be safe with me." Slowly, she opens her eyes. She's greeted by a breathtaking sunset stretching across the countryside. Nick quietly explains that whenever he felt trapped, he came here because riding made him feel free, almost like he was flying. He thought she deserved to feel that freedom too. The words leave Ava speechless, because somehow Nick always seems to understand exactly what she needs. Nick asks about her dream. Ava admits she wants to become a lawyer, even though her father only allowed it because it could benefit the family to him. She's still nothing more than someone to marry off for political gain. Nick listens quietly, then smiles. "I think I know the solution." Ava looks at him, confused. Nick doesn't hesitate. "Date me, Ava. I'll set you free." That night, Ava returns home after spending the day with Nick. She collapses onto her bed. But sleep is the last thing on her mind. Nick's words keep replaying in her head. "Date me, Ava. I'll set you free." Then another thought suddenly hits her. Wait, does this mean they're actually dating before she knows it? She's already thinking about what to wear on their next date. And that's when she realizes something. She's genuinely fallen for him. The moment doesn't last long. Her bedroom door suddenly swings open. Standing there is her father, Alessandro Moretti. He demands to know why she came home so late. Ava quickly blames school. Her father isn't convinced. Instead, he orders her to clear tomorrow evening. She's attending an important meeting, and she'd better not be late or underdressed. The next day, Ava receives the location, 6 o'clock, 19th floor, C Hotel, as she heads there. She can't stop wondering why her father suddenly wants her involved. He's never invited her to one of his meetings before. Maybe this is finally her chance to prove herself. Holding on to that hope, she steps into the elevator. Just before the doors close, someone calls out, "Hold the door." It's Nick of all the places they could meet. He somehow ends up in the same elevator. Ava immediately accuses him of stalking her again. Nick laughs, but after seeing how she's dressed, he assumes she's meeting another man. He actually looks jealous. Ava can't help teasing him. "I'm meeting my father." "Why would I meet another man when I already have you?" Nick instantly relaxes, leaning against her shoulder. He quietly admits she had him worried. Nick gently kisses her neck. He softly asks, "Can I kiss you?" Then kisses her anyway, this time. Ava doesn't pull away. The elevator keeps climbing, while the two completely lose themselves in the moment. Finally, the elevator reaches the 19th floor. The doors slowly open. Standing outside is Alessandro Moretti. Ava's heart almost stops. She immediately tries to explain, but before she can, her father calmly looks at Nick. "It's been a while, Nick." Nick nods respectfully. "It's good to see you, Don Moretti." Ava can only stare in disbelief. Nick knows her father? Then Alessandro drops the biggest bombshell yet. "Say hello, Ava. This is the future head of the Caponelli family, and the man you're going to marry." A few days earlier, Nick learns he'll be entering a political marriage. His father explains that the Russian mafia is expanding to strengthen their position. The American mafia families decide to form a marriage alliance. Nick doesn't argue, as the future head of the Caponelli family. He's always known this day would come. Later, Leo asks the obvious question. "What about Juliet?" Nick simply smiles. "I'm going to sabotage the wedding. If my fiancé runs away, we can't get married." But beneath the jokes, Nick admits something he's never said before. His future was decided long before he was born. Then he remembers Ava, the promise he made. "I'll set you free." Only now does he realize why those words came so naturally. When Ava talked about living in a cage, he saw himself more than anything. He wanted to give her the freedom neither of them had. The story returns to the present. Nick finally learns who his fiancée is. It feels like fate has given him a second chance for Ava. It's the exact opposite. She stands there speechless, while Nick's father and Ava's father casually discuss their marriage, as if her opinion doesn't matter. When Nick's father asks whether she's happy, her own father answers instead. He admits he never even told her about the engagement, because in his eyes, she doesn't need an explanation, she just needs to obey, watching everything unfold. Nick finally understands how little freedom Ava has. Unable to take it anymore, Ava apologizes and rushes outside. Nick immediately follows. He explains that he only found out about the marriage a few days ago. He had no idea she was the bride, but Ava can't believe him. From her perspective, nothing makes sense. Nick appeared at the restaurant, found her university, learned everything about her, kept showing up wherever she went. How could any of that possibly be a coincidence? To Ava, there's only one answer. He planned everything. Tears begin running down her face. She tells Nick she trusted him. I don't care if you're telling the truth. Leave me alone. I never want to see you again. Then she walks away, leaving Nick standing there, unable to stop her. Later that night, Ava sits alone at a bar. She keeps replaying everything that happened, wondering if any of it was ever real. Then someone suddenly sits beside her. He orders a Black Russian, before calmly asking, "So, you don't like your fiancé?" Ava freezes. The stranger smiles. "My name is Alec Kasnikov. It's a pleasure to meet you." The story picks up exactly where the last chapter ended. The mysterious blonde man introduces himself. "My name is Alec Kasnikov." Ava has never seen him before, yet somehow, he already knows exactly who she is. Then drops a name that completely catches Ava off guard. The Undertaker, confused. Ava asks who he's talking about. Alec smiles. "Your fiancé, Nick Caponelli." According to him, Nick isn't just the heir to the Caponelli family, he's one of the most feared men in the mafia world, a man known as the Undertaker. Ava is left speechless. Alec notices the confusion on her face, then tells her she's only seen the side of Nick he wanted her to see. If she really wants the truth, she should ask him about the secret he's been hiding, according to Alec. Once Ava learns that secret, she'll never agree to marry Nick. Before he can say anything else, someone suddenly grabs him and throws him aside. Nick. The two mafia heirs lock eyes immediately. Alec mocks him, asking if he's really going to let another man comfort his own fiancée. Nick loses his temper and steps forward, but before the fight can begin, Ava gets between them. She grabs Nick's arm, then quietly says, "We're leaving," as they walk away. Alec calls out one last time. Don't forget to ask him about the secret. Inside the car, Nick immediately tells Ava to stay away from Alec. But this time, Ava refuses to stay quiet. She reminds Nick that everyone knew about the engagement except her. A complete stranger seems to know more about his life than she does. After pulling the car over, Nick finally apologizes. He admits he never stopped to think about how all of this looked from Ava's perspective. Then, he gently takes her hand and places it against his chest. His heart is racing. For the first time, Ava realizes something unexpected. Nick isn't angry, he's scared. Nick starts from the beginning. A few days before they reunited, his father informed him about the arranged marriage. By then, he had already fallen in love with Ava. His original plan was to ruin the wedding. But everything changed. The moment he discovered the bride was her, he was so happy, he never stopped to think about how she would feel, looking directly into her eyes. Nick tells her the one thing he's wanted to say all along. "I never lied to you. My feelings for you. They're real." The moment Ava returned home, her father struck her across the face so hard that she collapsed onto the floor. Furious, Alessandro demanded to know how she dared embarrass him during such an important meeting. According to him, she had made a complete fool of the Moretti family in front of the Caponellis. Ava finally spoke up. She said that all he ever cared about was the family's reputation. He had never once cared how she felt, or why she had walked away from the engagement before she could finish. Another slap silenced her. Alessandro grabbed her by the face and declared that she would marry whether she wanted to or not. The decisions belonged to him alone, and Ava's feelings meant nothing. She should simply be grateful that he had raised and provided for her all these years. Ava didn't fight back. She told herself she was used to this. To her father, she was nothing more than a beautiful doll. She almost convinced herself that resisting was pointless. Then, Nick's words echoed through her mind. He had told her that his feelings for her were real. The memory shifted back to their conversation after meeting Alec. Ava had bitterly asked what any of it mattered now. But Nick calmly reminded her that no one could force that choice. The only thing that truly mattered was what she wanted. Back in the present, she declared that the most important part of any marriage was how she felt. Then she apologized, before firmly stating that she would marry the person she wanted, when she wanted. Alessandro's expression immediately darkened as he removed his watch. He decided it was time to teach his daughter another lesson. The following morning, Nick arrived outside Ava's house carrying a flower. The moment he spotted her, he happily ran over to greet her. He offered to drive her to school, knowing she had gotten home late the previous night. But as he reached for her, he noticed the bruises covering her wrist. His smile disappeared. Quietly, he asked what had happened. Ava immediately pulled her hand away. Then she looked him straight in the eyes. Nick had once promised to set her free. Now, she asked him to prove it, if his feelings were truly real. Then, she wanted him to free her from the life she had been trapped in. Nick didn't answer with words. Instead, he took her somewhere completely unexpected, an amusement park. Ava looked around in confusion, wondering what any of this had to do with freedom. Ava screamed the entire way. When it finally stopped, she accused Nick of trying to kill her, laughing. Nick pointed out that she had survived her very first roller coaster. Then he asked if she had ever been to an amusement park before. Ava quietly admitted that she hadn't. Her father had always considered places like this a waste of time. The two spent the rest of the day exploring the park together, for the first time in years. Ava laughed without worrying about her family's expectations. As the day came to an end, Nick noticed that her feet were sore from walking. He gently removed her shoes, apologizing for not realizing how much pain they had caused. Ava insisted she was fine, but as she watched a happy family walking together, she quietly admitted that she sometimes wished she had been born into an ordinary family. Maybe then, she could have enjoyed simple moments like this much more often. Nick smiled. Then he asked her why they couldn't build a normal family together instead, pointing out that a mafia heir hardly sounded normal. But Nick painted a different picture, a quiet life, morning kisses, walks on the beach, picnics, amusement parks. For the first time, Ava found herself believing that kind of future might actually be possible. As they prepared to leave, Nick suddenly lifted Ava into his arms. She protested, insisting she could walk on her own. But Nick refused, and he wasn't about to let her suffer then. He suddenly stopped. Someone was standing directly in their path. The stranger smiled, then casually asked if they'd enjoyed their date. Ava stared at him in confusion. Babe. The single word left her completely speechless. Nick immediately recognized the woman, Jane, before he could say anything else. She stormed over and kicked him square in the leg. Ava watched in complete disbelief. Jane angrily demanded to know why Nick's phone had been turned off all day, while she had been buried under mountains of work. Realizing she had an audience, Jane instantly changed her attitude. She cheerfully grabbed Ava's hand, complimented her beauty, and jokingly suggested she dump Nick and come home with her instead. Nick immediately shouted her name, within seconds. The two were arguing like children, watching the chaos unfold. Ava couldn't make sense of any of it. After letting out a long sigh, Nick decided it was finally time. Then he introduced her to his family. The scene shifted to a nearby restaurant. Ava quietly wondered if she'd accidentally been invited to an eating contest. Nick finally explained everything. Jane wasn't his girlfriend at all. They had simply grown up together, and he considered her a little sister. The young man sitting beside them, Leo, was Nick's younger brother. Both of them helped him with his work. Hearing that, Ava couldn't help comparing them to her own family. If they were all part of the mafia, why did they seem so normal? As the meal continued, a waitress arrived with champagne. Seeing the restaurant jogged Ava's memory. This was the exact place where she and Nick had first met. Curious, she asked if he came here often. Nick casually revealed the truth. He didn't just visit the restaurant, he owned it. In fact, he owned the entire hotel. Ava stared at him in disbelief, explaining that Leo handled most of the business while he only stopped by occasionally. Still, for some reason, he had felt strangely compelled to visit that night. Now he believed fate had brought him there, so he could meet Ava. Before the romantic moment could last, Jane immediately pretended to gag. Leo joined in, teasing Nick mercilessly. He joked that this sweet version of Nick didn't even resemble the ruthless boss who had practically worked them to death while searching for Ava. Nick quickly denied everything, before the siblings started bickering all over again. Watching the three of them argue, Ava suddenly burst into laughter. For the first time, she realized something. A normal mafia family really did exist. Elsewhere, someone else was having a much worse day. Ava's ex-boyfriend wandered through a dark alley, desperately trying to buy chocolate. Dealer after dealer refused to sell to him. One finally admitted the truth. Someone had warned everyone not to do business with him. The dealer fled before saying anything more. Ava's ex immediately thought of Nick. He realized Nick's influence reached far beyond what he had imagined, just as frustration began taking over. Another familiar face stepped out of the shadows. Alec, seeing an opportunity. Alec offered him a chocolate package to distribute. If he helped move it, he could keep part of the profits. Blinded by desperation, Ava's ex accepted the offer without hesitation. After the chaotic dinner with Nick's family, the two found themselves standing quietly by the pier. For the first time all evening, everything was peaceful. As Ava admired the glittering city lights, she couldn't help but whisper, "Wow." Nick smiled apologetically. He was still embarrassed about the disaster that dinner had become, but Ava simply laughed. She told him she'd had an amazing time. It was the liveliest family dinner she'd ever experienced. What surprised her most was how different their families were. Both of them had been born into mafia families. Yet Nick's home was filled with laughter, unlike hers. Ava quietly asked him something she'd always wondered. "Don't you resent it? It's not like we ever asked to be born into a mob family." Nick gazed out across the water for a moment. His smile disappeared. He admitted that he used to hate it as a child. He constantly wondered why he had been born into such a terrifying family. He wanted to run away again and again, but eventually, he realized there was no point hating something he couldn't change. Instead, he chose to become strong enough to protect the people he loved. Nick awkwardly laughed it off and suggested they head home before it got cold, but Ava stopped him. She told him how much she admired him, living with that burden, yet still choosing kindness. Made him far stronger than he realized. Those words completely caught Nick off guard before he could think twice. He reached out, gently pulled Ava closer, and asked the question he'd been holding back. "Can I kiss you?" "I don't think I can contain myself anymore." Unfortunately, they weren't as alone as they thought, back at the Moretti estate. Two familiar faces had witnessed everything, Bella and Ava's older brother, Vincent. Bella watched the couple with endless excitement. "Ava has a boyfriend?" Bella quickly corrected him. "He isn't just a boyfriend. He's her fiancé." Vincent froze. "Ava's getting married?" When Ava finally arrived home, Bella wasted no time teasing her. She excitedly asked what she liked most about Nick. His looks, his money, his family, or maybe all three. After all, he was Nick Caponelli. The moment Vincent heard that name, the mug in his hand slipped from his grasp. He rushed over, grabbed Ava by the shoulders, and demanded to know if their father had arranged the marriage. Ava, confused by his sudden reaction, simply asked him to let go. Elsewhere, their father, Alessandro, was speaking on the phone. He calmly assured the caller that everything was proceeding according to plan. The marriage would happen. The mysterious caller mocked him. To them, he sounded less like a father, and more like a businessman negotiating another deal. Alessandro coldly dismissed the accusation before ending the call. Moments later, Vincent burst into Alessandro's office without knocking. He demanded to know if the rumors were true. Was Ava really being forced to marry Nick Caponelli? Alessandro didn't deny it. It was an alliance, the only way to stop the growing threat posed by the Russian mafia. Vincent didn't care about politics. He argued that Ava deserved to know the truth before being pushed into such a marriage. But Alessandro refused. Nothing would change. If that's the case, maybe it's better she never finds out then. He revealed the heartbreaking secret that had been buried for years. The man responsible for killing Ava's twin brother Andrew was none other than Nick Caponelli. Inside a dimly lit warehouse, Alek Asnikov's men reported that everything had gone according to plan. Most of their operation had already been completed. His subordinate almost mentioned orders from their boss in Russia, but immediately caught himself and apologized. Before anyone could say another word, the warehouse doors slammed open. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Alek welcomed him with a grin. "Well, if it isn't the Undertaker, what brings you to our humble establishment?" Nick calmly tossed a bag onto the floor. Alek glanced at the bag and smirked. "Don't you think that's a little excessive? Cross us again, and next time it'll be your own hand in that bag." He suddenly stepped forward, pressing a knife dangerously close to Nick's neck. "Next time, I'm playing for keeps." Within seconds, both gangs reached for their weapons. The entire room fell silent. Nick stared directly into Alek's eyes. "So, are you declaring war?" Alek pretended to think about it. "I don't know." Nick reminded him that starting a war on Caponelli territory would only end badly for the Russians. Alek agreed. For now, they were at a disadvantage. But a full-scale war wasn't the only option, sometimes. All it took was striking someone's weakest point. Alek casually mentioned Ava. Nick's expression changed instantly. "You touch her, and you won't live long enough to regret it." Alek laughed. "See? You become an angry dog whenever someone mentions your fiancé. But I'm not the one you should be worried about." He brought up Alessandro Moretti instead, a man infamous for his cruelty, even toward his own family then. He deliberately began bringing up Ava's painful past. "That's enough. It's none of your business." He gave Alek one final warning. "The next time we meet, it'll be war." Without another word, Nick turned around and walked away, watching him leave. Alek couldn't stop smiling. I've barely started having fun, but what Alek had said refused to leave Nick's mind. Moments later, He called Ava. She answered almost immediately. He asked where she was. Ava told him she was simply reading a book in the garden. The call suddenly went quiet. A moment later, she looked up. Nick was already standing right in front of her, breathing heavily. He immediately wrapped his arms around her. Nick held onto her even tighter. "Come live with me. I already have everything ready." She could feel him trembling for the first time. Nick genuinely looked afraid. Nick looked into her eyes as if he wanted to say something important, before he could finish. Familiar voice interrupted them. Alessandro Moretti had arrived. The atmosphere changed instantly. Ava tried to explain, but Nick calmly stepped forward. "Don Moretti, may I have a moment of your time? I'd like to ask you something." Whatever Nick was about to say could change everything. Inside Alessandro's office, Nick stood before him with clenched fists. His voice was calm, but his anger was impossible to hide. "Is it true? Did you really lock Ava up?" Alessandro didn't even flinch. "So what if I did?" Nick stared at him in disbelief. "How? How could you do something like that to your own daughter?" Alessandro's expression remained cold. "How pathetically sentimental of you. Ava was no better than a beast then. She was drowning in drugs and booze every night. She couldn't even recognize her own parents. Our family's reputation had already been hit hard after the disgraceful death of one of my heirs. And Ava was destroying what little honor we had left. I was only doing what was necessary as the head of this family. Give me a break. You call locking up and beating someone who was broken after losing her brother. Doing what was necessary, as her father. You should have comforted her." Alessandro dismissed Nick's outrage as nothing more than pointless sentiment. But Nick had already made up his mind. He told Alessandro that Ava was leaving with him, and that he refused to leave her in that house any longer. Alessandro immediately objected. In his eyes, Ava still belonged to the Moretti family. She was his daughter, and only he had the right to decide her future. Nick stopped him before he could finish. "Ava isn't anyone's property." With that, he slammed the office door behind him and walked away. Ava had been anxiously waiting outside. The moment Nick stepped out, she rushed toward him. Instead of explaining what had happened, Nick gently took her hand. He told her everything had been settled, and that she was coming home with him. Ava was completely caught off guard. She tried asking what had happened inside the office, but Nick could only apologize. He admitted that he had finally learned everything her father had done to her, and wished he had known the truth much sooner. Ava immediately tried to calm him down. She didn't want the argument with her father to become even worse because of her. Nick refused to change his decision, as far as he was concerned. She wasn't spending another night in the Moretti mansion. Not long afterward, the two arrived outside Nick's house. Before getting out of the car, Nick asked whether there was anything she needed, but instead of answering, Ava quietly opened the door and stepped outside. Nick immediately followed after her, confused. He asked where she was going. Ava finally stopped and turned around. She understood why Nick had been so desperate to protect her, but there was something he hadn't realized. He kept criticizing Alessandro for trying to control her, yet he had just done the very same thing. Without asking what she wanted, he'd made every decision for her. Nick fell silent. Even so, he admitted he couldn't compromise when it came to her safety. Ava knew his intentions had come from a place of love, but she still needed time to sort through her feelings. She told him she'd cool off on her own. Nick remained where he stood, watching her disappear into the distance. As Ava wandered through the streets alone, her emotions became impossible to sort out. Only a few hours earlier, she had been looking forward to spending the day with Nick. Now, everything had fallen apart. She knew his intentions had been good, but she couldn't stop feeling frustrated by the way he'd taken away her choice. Then, a familiar voice suddenly called out from behind her. She froze, standing there. It was Jimmy, her ex-boyfriend. Jimmy immediately noticed Ava's sad mood and wasted no time making a disgusting offer. He suggested that spending the night with him would make all of her problems disappear. For a brief moment, Ava remembered the person she used to be. Back then, she would have accepted an escape from reality no matter who offered it, but not anymore. She calmly removed Jimmy's hand from her shoulder, looked him straight in the eyes, and admitted she couldn't believe she'd ever dated trash like him. Humiliated by Ava's rejection, Jimmy completely lost his temper. Just as he was about to lash out, another man stepped between them. It was Alec, the mysterious stranger Ava had met at the hotel. "You should leave right now." Alec made it clear that Jimmy isn't being asked. Jimmy swallowed his pride and walked away. Once they were alone, Ava questioned why Alec had helped her. Instead of denying it, Alec admitted he'd looked into her background. He already knew she was the youngest daughter of the Moretti family, and that everyone saw her as the family's biggest disappointment. Seeing the sadness on her face, Alec asked if it still bothered her. Ava confessed she was tired of being treated like a hopeless case. No matter how hard she tried to move forward, her past always seemed to define who she was. Her words triggered Alec's memories for a moment. He remembered the cruelty and violence that had shaped his own life. Then he told Ava something unexpected. Compared to the monsters he'd known, she had done almost nothing wrong. He'd seen criminals betray their own families, sell out their closest friends, and destroy anyone standing in the way of profit. Compared to people like that, do you think any of them are in any position to judge a mere addict? Ava couldn't help but laugh. She asked if that had been his strange way of comforting her. Alec insisted he was only telling the truth. The conversation soon shifted, curious about his accent. Ava jokingly asked if he traveled all the way from Russia just to stop her engagement. Alec played along, asking if she'd cancel the wedding if he did. Ava smiled. She reminded him that the decision wasn't hers to make. If anyone could stop the marriage, it would have to be her father. Realizing it was getting late, Ava decided it was finally time to leave. Alec teased her, saying he'd expected someone with her reputation to stay out much longer and hoped their paths would never cross again. Instead of saying goodbye, Alec suddenly leaned forward and kissed her, completely caught off guard. Ava could only stare at him in disbelief. Alec simply smiled, telling her that if she ever wanted to run away again, she should call him. She still couldn't figure out what kind of person Alec really was. Meanwhile, Alec watched her disappear into the distance, and for the first time, he admitted something to himself. He wanted her. Not long afterward, Ava finally arrived at Nick's penthouse. She found Nick sitting alone in the dark, waiting for her. Trying to avoid another fight, Nick quietly told her to get some rest. He believed they should talk once they'd both calmed down. Nick looked at her carefully. She insisted she wasn't drunk, and accused him of treating her like she still had a problem, without saying another word. Nick pulled out his phone. On the screen was a photo of Alec kissing Ava. The room instantly fell silent. Trying to calm the situation, Ava explained what had happened. Jimmy had been bothering her at the bar. Alec had stepped in, forced Jimmy to leave, and afterward they'd only exchanged a few words. To her the kiss meant nothing, and she insisted Nick had nothing to worry about. Those words only made him even angrier. Nothing to worry about. Ava had no idea how close she'd come to real danger. Nick blurted out that she could have died, realizing he was too emotional to think clearly. Nick changed his mind. He decided they would talk in the morning instead, but Ava refused to let it go. She demanded that he tell her the truth. Instead, Nick pleaded with her. He admitted he didn't want to keep arguing, and begged her to wait until tomorrow. Feeling hurt and completely misunderstood, Ava stormed into the bedroom, slammed the door shut, and finally let herself break down. She kept telling herself it was nothing, even though deep down, it hurt far more than she wanted to admit. The next morning, Nick prepared himself to apologize. Coffee in hand, he knocked on Ava's bedroom door when she didn't answer. He quietly let himself inside, instead of finding her asleep. He found her burning with a high fever, lost in a feverish dream. Ava felt trapped. Her body was heavy. She could barely move, and all she could think about was how she always seemed to disappoint everyone around her. She wondered if this was her punishment for hurting Nick. Then, she felt something cool against her forehead. Nick had stayed by her side the entire time after calling a doctor. He made sure she received treatment. When Ava finally woke up, she thought everything had been a dream. Surely Nick had already gone to work. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and found him wearing an apron. Ava immediately felt guilty. She apologized for everything. She'd walked out on him, gotten photographed with another man. To her, she was nothing but trouble. Nick quickly shut that idea down. She wasn't a burden. If anything, he was the one who owed her an apology. He admitted he'd lost control the previous night, because he was terrified after learning she'd met Alec Asnikov. Hearing that, Ava finally confessed what she'd been thinking all along. She believed Nick was ashamed of her, ashamed that she'd once been addicted to drugs, ashamed that she couldn't stand up to her father. Nick stared at her in disbelief. Then he realized something important. Don Moretti had never told Ava the truth. She knew the Asnikovs were another mafia family, but nothing beyond that. Nick asked her to finish her breakfast, because it was finally time for her to learn exactly who Alec Asnikov was, and why getting involved with him could put her life in unimaginable danger. Holding Ava close on the sofa, Nick asked her a simple question. Did she know why her father wanted them to get married? When Ava admitted she didn't, Nick finally told her everything. The criminal underworld of America had long been controlled by two powerful families, the Caponellis and Morettis. But now, a third organization was trying to seize control. The Asnikovs, a ruthless Russian mafia family, unlike their families. The Asnikovs had no limits. They had no problem targeting innocent people, or using torture to get what they wanted to stop them. The Caponellis and Moretti's planned to unite through marriage. Nick then revealed why Alec kept approaching her. It wasn't because Alec was interested in Ava. It was because she had become Nick's greatest weakness. Nick warned. Alec wouldn't hesitate to kill her. Only then did Ava realize why Nick had been so angry the night before. As Ava thought back to everything Alec had said, she realized he'd been lying to her from the very beginning. Nick apologized. He admitted he had dragged her into this life without asking for her permission. But even now, he believed protecting her was worth it. Ava worried that keeping her away from her father would damage the alliance between their families. Nick didn't care. Politics no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was keeping the woman he loved safe. The confession caught Ava completely off guard. Love? How could Nick love someone he'd barely known? She insisted he didn't really know her. She was indecisive, a coward, unpredictable. Surely she wasn't the person he imagined. Instead of arguing, Nick laughed softly. Not because he found her ridiculous, but because she was repeating exactly what she'd told him the day they first met. That every relationship failed because people always wanted her to become someone she wasn't. Then, for the first time, Nick let his own mask fall. He confessed that he barely slept every night. He was haunted by the terrible things he had to do for his family. The violence, the bloodshed, the innocent people caught in the middle. His entire life felt like an endless nightmare. He blamed himself for everything happening to Ava, if he had truly loved her. He should have ended the engagement long ago, but he couldn't, because being with her made him feel like an ordinary man in his eyes. Ava refused to let him carry that burden alone. Nick had changed her life for the first time. Someone saw her as more than Don Moretti's daughter or the family's disappointment. He saw Ava. Simply as Ava, she didn't want some grand fairy tale. Morning kisses, evening walks, picnics, amusement parks. A future built from small moments together. She asked Nick to promise they would experience those things, no matter what happened, instead of answering with words. Nick kissed her, though Ava still feared getting hurt, for the first time. She believed everything might be okay. Later, Ava called her father. She calmly informed him that she had decided to stay with Nick, and that they would let him know when they chose an engagement date. Don Moretti exploded with rage. He reminded Ava that he decided where she lived, not her. Before Ava could answer, Nick took the phone. He simply told Don Moretti that Ava would stay wherever she wanted. Then he hung up. Humiliated, Don Moretti smashed the phone in fury. His original plan had been to use the alliance with the Caponellis to gain leverage over them. But now, it looked like he was losing control instead. Cornered, he made a decision that would change everything. He picked up another phone and called the one man he should never have trusted, Alec Asnikov. Don Moretti asked if Alec's previous offer still stood. Would the Asnikovs still hand over most of the Caponellis' territory? If he helped them, Alec smiled. Of course the offer still stood. The chapter opens with Nick and Ava sharing an intimate moment together in the shower. Their passion continues until exhaustion finally overtakes Ava. The scene then shifts to the following morning. Ava slowly wakes up in bed, confused about how she ended up there. She wonders if she passed out during the night before quietly leaving the bedroom to ask Nick about what happened. However, before she can find him, she is greeted by Jane instead. Jane cheerfully tells Ava that Nick had asked her to keep her company. Apparently, he woke Jane up at the crack of dawn saying that an urgent matter had come up and he needed to leave immediately. Although Ava insists that she can take care of herself, Jane isn't convinced. She reminds Ava that Nick is the same man who searched all across New York for an entire month, just to find her. Hearing that, Ava realizes Jane has a point. Just as Ava tries to retreat back to her room, Jane quickly grabs her. Since Nick isn't around, she decides it's the perfect opportunity for the two of them to spend some quality time together. Before Ava even realizes what's happening, Jane has already turned the day into a fashion show. One outfit after another, Jane enthusiastically dresses Ava up, insisting that everything looks perfect on her. Watching Jane's excitement makes Ava feel strangely nostalgic. It reminds her of the countless times Bella used to play dress-up with her. As the fun settles down, Jane suddenly becomes more serious. She admits that she was worried when she first heard Nick would be entering a marriage of convenience. Nick had always been the type to sacrifice himself for the sake of his family, but marriage felt like an entirely different level of responsibility. To Jane's surprise, though, Nick genuinely looks happy. She can't even remember the last time she saw him smile so sincerely. That is why she thanks Ava from the bottom of her heart and asks her to continue taking good care of him. Ava smiles warmly, explaining that there's no need for thanks, because being with Nick makes her happy as well. Satisfied with Ava's answer, Jane announces that it's finally time to leave. Curious, Ava asks where they're going, but Jane simply tells her it's somewhere special. The scene shifts once again. After getting out of the car, Ava is immediately captivated by the breathtaking sunset stretching across the horizon. She wonders why Jane suddenly brought her to such a beautiful place. Jane simply smiles. Then she reveals the real reason, because someone asked her to. Standing quietly behind Ava is Nick. Surprised, Ava turns around in disbelief. She thought he had urgent business to take care of, but Nick calmly explains that he finished everything earlier than expected. After a brief pause, Nick nervously asks if the two of them can take a walk together. As they stroll through the familiar scenery, Nick reminds Ava that this is the same place where they once went horseback riding together. The memory immediately comes rushing back to Ava. Nick admits that he originally considered proposing at an expensive restaurant or luxurious hotel. In the end, however, he realized that choosing a place filled with memories meant far more than any extravagant location ever could. Then, with his heart racing, Nick kneels down before Ava. Taking out a ring, he finally asks the question he has wanted to ask for so long. Even though their marriage was arranged by their families, Nick wanted to give Ava a proper proposal. He tells her that he doesn't want her to marry him simply because circumstances forced her to. Instead, he wants her to choose him, because she truly wants to spend the rest of her life with him. Nick even reveals that the so-called urgent business from earlier was nothing more than an excuse to buy himself enough time to prepare everything before the flowers wilted. Growing increasingly nervous, he quickly tells Ava that she doesn't have to say yes if she isn't ready. Before he can finish speaking, Ava gently kisses him. With tears of happiness in her eyes, she gives him the answer he has been hoping for. Yes, she will marry him. A brand new chapter of Nick and Ava's relationship is about to begin. The Moretti mansion was filled with guests from both families. It was finally the day of Nick and Ava's engagement party. One after another, the guests stepped forward to congratulate Nick. Nick thanked them politely, but his attention remained fixed on Alessandro Moretti, seeing Ava's father standing among the guests. He couldn't help remembering the conversation they had before the party. Back then, Alessandro had insisted the engagement be held at the Moretti mansion. Nick had assumed he wouldn't even attend. Instead, Alessandro explained that the alliance between the Caponellis and the Morettis had to appear stronger than ever. Everyone needed to believe the two families were still on good terms. He had agreed because it gave him the perfect chance to keep an eye on Alessandro. Even so, he couldn't help wondering what Ava's father was really planning. Before Nick could think any further, Leo and Jane walked over. Leo joked that Nick had been staring at Alessandro so intensely. He looked like he was preparing to eliminate a target. The two congratulated him on the engagement. Before asking where Ava was, Jane wondered if she'd run away. Leo laughed, saying it would have been the most cliché engagement party imaginable. Nick assured them Ava was only getting ready. Just then, she finally appeared. The moment Nick saw her, he was completely speechless. Ava apologized for keeping everyone waiting without thinking. Nick pulled her closer. He admitted he'd rather cancel the entire party and spend the evening alone with her. Leo and Jane immediately began teasing him. Ava couldn't help laughing. Even so, she reminded Nick that everyone had come to celebrate with them. She still wanted to greet her family first. Nick immediately offered to go with her. Ava gently reassured him. The mansion was full of people. Nothing was going to happen. She promised she'd be right back. Nick reluctantly let her go. A moment later, one of the Caponelli men approached him. Nick's father wanted to see him. Meanwhile, Ava joined her family. Bella couldn't stop complimenting how beautiful she looked. Angie teased her for once insisting she'd never get married. Their mother smiled, saying Ava had simply been waiting for the right person. Hearing that, Ava quietly admitted to herself that she never imagined this day would come either. As they continued talking, neither Alessandro nor Vincent was there. Her mother explained that the two had stepped away to discuss something. Bella mentioned that Vincent had been acting strangely for days, and always seemed upset. Ava couldn't help wondering what was bothering him. Angie brushed it off, suggesting Vincent was probably just going through another phase. Then she changed the subject, asking Ava to introduce them to her fiancé. Ava happily agreed, but before she could take another step, Vincent suddenly grabbed Ava's arm. Without explaining himself, he began dragging her away from the crowd. He declared that she wasn't going to marry Nick Caponelli. Ava immediately assumed Alessandro had manipulated him. She calmly explained that no one had forced her into the engagement. Marrying Nick had been her own decision, but Vincent stopped her. He warned Ava that she had no idea who Nick really was, before he could explain any further. Nick arrived after hearing the raised voices. The moment Vincent saw him, he finally lost control. He demanded to know how Nick could stand there pretending to be part of their family. After destroying it, Ava froze. She couldn't understand what Vincent meant. Then, Vincent revealed the truth he had been hiding. Andrew, Ava's twin brother, had died after being shot right in front of Nick. And according to Vincent, the one who pulled the trigger was Nick himself. The words echoed in Ava's mind. She desperately tried to convince herself it wasn't real, that it had to be another nightmare, but the shock overwhelmed her. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor. As children, the twins would spend hours lying beneath the open sky, turning clouds into imaginary shapes. Andrew proudly pointed one out as a turtle, then another as an apple. Before asking if the next one looked like an ice cream cone, Ava couldn't help laughing. She teased him that it was obviously a whale, and accused him of only thinking about dessert. Andrew burst into laughter after being caught. Then, with genuine curiosity, he asked how she always knew exactly what he was thinking. For Ava, the answer had always been simple. They were twins. She could read him like an open book. Back then, life felt peaceful, and she truly believed those quiet days would last forever. Unfortunately, they didn't. Years later, that peaceful childhood had become nothing more than a memory. Standing inside Ava Moretti's office, Ava desperately pleaded for a chance to prove herself. She wanted to help with the family business. She wanted to study law, become a lawyer, and stand beside Andrew as an equal. She insisted she could do everything her brother could, but Alessandro refused to even consider it. To him, a daughter had no place in the family business. Her only purpose was to remain quiet, marry into a respectable family, and learn how to become a proper housewife. Every dream Ava had was dismissed without hesitation. Realizing there was nothing more she could say, she silently turned and walked away. Outside the office, Andrew caught up to her. He gently grabbed her hand, trying one last time to reach her. He begged her to stop trying to involve herself in the mafia, unlike Ava. He knew exactly how terrifying their father's world truly was, if he had the choice. He admitted he would have run away long ago, but instead of hearing his concern, Ava exploded. Years of frustration poured out all at once. She accused Andrew of having everything simply because he had been born a boy. She told him to stop complaining, calling him pathetic, even though deep down, she already knew none of it was his fault. Andrew had always been kind, always forgiving. She convinced herself she'd apologize later, just like every other time. She believed there would always be another chance. She couldn't have been more wrong. The next time Ava stood before Andrew, he could no longer hear her. His body rested inside a coffin, surrounded by flowers. Behind her, Alessandro coldly declared that Andrew had taken his own life. To him, his son had simply been weak. But Ava couldn't accept those words. She remembered Andrew's desperate plea, his wish to escape, his silent cry for help. Only now did she realize what he had truly been asking for. If only she had listened. If only she hadn't pushed him away. The guilt crushed her, and in that moment, her grief turned into hatred, not toward Andrew, but toward the man standing behind her. In her heart, she branded Alessandro with only one name: murderer. Unable to escape the guilt, Ava stopped caring about herself. One night, at another reckless party, a man named Jimmy approached her. He noticed how miserable she looked, then offered her bad substance, promising they would make all her problems disappear. Ava immediately recognized what he was holding. She knew exactly where that path would lead. Rock bottom, but at that point, she no longer cared. She accepted without hesitation. From that day forward, she buried herself in one meaningless party after another. She wanted to ruin herself, to become someone unrecognizable, because if she destroyed herself enough, maybe she could finally forget who she was. Her self-destructive spiral eventually reached Alessandro. Furious that his daughter's behavior had become public gossip, he dragged her back home to him. She had become nothing but an embarrassment to the Moretti name. He locked her away, determined to force her back into obedience. But Ava didn't resist. Instead, she quietly accepted every punishment. In her mind, this was exactly what she deserved. When Ava finally opened her eyes, she found herself back in her room. Then everything came rushing back. Vincent's words echoed inside her mind. The accusation that Nick Caponelli had murdered Andrew for so long. She believed she had finally escaped the trauma that haunted her childhood. Nick had been the first person who gave her hope for a future. The first person who made her believe life could still be worth living. But now, that hope felt like nothing more than a betrayal of Andrew's memory. If Nick truly was responsible, she swore she would avenge her brother no matter who stood in her way, even if that revenge eventually consumed her as well. Determined to uncover the truth, Ava stepped outside, waiting for her. Was Alec Asnikov? He reminded her of the warning he'd given before. As Ava stared at him in shock, she immediately recognized who he was. Alec simply looked back at her, as though he had expected this meeting all along. Back at his penthouse, Nick sat alone in silence. His head rested in his hands, as the nightmare from the engagement party replayed over and over again. Then Alessandro's cold voice echoed through his mind. The Don had calmly ordered him to leave, claiming he could take care of his own daughter. Nick refused to believe any of it had happened by chance. He confronted Alessandro, demanding to know if the entire incident had been planned, but the mafia boss simply smiled. He claimed to know nothing, then warned Nick that staying any longer would only fuel the rumors spreading through the room, as whispers surrounded them from every direction. Nick's father quietly stepped beside him. There was only one piece of advice. It was a trap. Leaving now was the smartest move. Nick clenched his jaw deep down. He already knew his father was right. The memory faded, but the regret remained. Nick blamed himself for letting his guard down. He should have seen it coming, yet none of that mattered now. The only thing occupying his mind was Ava. He could only hope she was safe before he had another chance to think. His phone suddenly rang. It was Leo. Nick tried to tell him he'd call back later, but Leo immediately cut him off. Ava had disappeared, and she had left with Alec Asnikov for the first time that night. Real panic Panic crossed Nick's face. Elsewhere, Alec had brought Ava somewhere far from the chaos. Instead of questioning her, he handed her a firearm and patiently showed her how to practice at a shooting range. He adjusted her stance, told her to loosen her grip, bend her elbows, control her breathing, then squeeze the trigger. The first shot echoed across the range. It wasn't perfect, but for someone who had never handled a weapon before, she did surprisingly well. Alec finally stopped the session. He warned her that pushing any further would only lead to accidents, then invited her to warm up by the fire before the cold night settled in, sitting together in silence. Ava asked how long it usually took to become a good shooter. Alec immediately understood what she was really asking. She wanted revenge, but he told her to forget the idea. Even if she somehow managed to confront her target, she'd be stopped long before pulling the trigger. And even if she succeeded, the Caponelli family would never let her walk away alive. Ava lowered her head. If revenge wasn't the answer, then what was she supposed to do? Alec's response was calm. Nothing she did now would bring Andrew back. Those words shattered the wall Ava had been desperately holding together. Tears finally poured down her face. She confessed that she hadn't been there when her brother needed her most. She couldn't save him while he was alive. How could she simply abandon him again now? The guilt had never disappeared. It had only been buried beneath everything else. More than anyone, she hated herself. Alec leaned in and then made an offer she never expected. If revenge was all she wanted, he could make it happen. All she had to do was say the word, and he would bring Nick's head back to her. Ava froze. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Could Alec really kill Nick before she could answer? Nick burst open the door looking for Ava, confused. She could only stare at him. Nick ignored everything else. He begged her to leave with him immediately, but Alec stepped between them. He warned Ava not to believe a single word Nick said. According to him, the truly dangerous man wasn't standing beside her. It was the man pretending to rescue her. The same man who had tried to marry her, even after supposedly murdering her brother. Nick refused to stay silent any longer. Nick denied the accusation without hesitation. He admitted that Andrew had visited him that night, but he swore he had never harmed him. This time, he wasn't asking Ava to trust him blindly. He promised to explain everything that had happened. If she still believed he was guilty after hearing the truth, he would place his own life in her hands. But Alec immediately dismissed every word. He insisted Nick was lying once again, caught between two men, both claiming to know the truth. Ava's thoughts spiraled into complete confusion. Nick had finally caught up to Ava, as she found herself torn between two completely different truths. One man claimed Nick had murdered her twin brother. The other insisted he'd been framed. Ava couldn't decide who deserved her trust. Alec stepped forward, convinced she'd made the right decision, but before he could finish speaking, Ava quietly walked past him. She thanked him for staying by her side, for comforting her when she needed it most. But if she was going to avenge Andrew, she wanted to do it with her own hands, not someone else's. As the two disappeared into the night, Alec remained seated in silence. Nothing had gone according to plan. He'd tried to provoke Ava, to make her hate Nick, yet somehow, she still chose to hear Nick's side of the story. His own thoughts began turning against him. He remembered asking Ava a simple question. "Do you want me to kill Nick?" The more he replayed her words, the more confused he became. For reasons he couldn't understand, those words left a sting he couldn't ignore. Why did he feel so insulted? Meanwhile, Nick led Ava away from the warehouse. He knew this wasn't the place to reveal the truth, if she was willing to listen. He wanted her to hear everything somewhere safe. Ava silently agreed. But doubt still lingered in her heart. What if Nick was lying? So before beginning, he made her one promise. What she was about to hear would be difficult to believe, but every single word would be the truth, then quietly nodded. Nick's story began years before Andrew's death. Back then, the Caponelli family and the Moretti family weren't sworn enemies. There was competition between them, but also mutual respect. Nick had met Andrew several times over the years, but beyond that, they were never close friends, at least not until one unexpected night changed everything. Later that evening, a loud knock echoed through Nick's home. Confused, he opened the door. Standing outside was Andrew. His breathing was uneven, and fear completely covered his face. Nick couldn't understand why Andrew had shown up in the middle of the night, but before he could send him away, Andrew desperately begged to come inside. He admitted someone was trying to kill him, and at any moment they might succeed. Once inside, Nick demanded an explanation. Andrew finally confessed. He had stolen money from the Italian mafia. After failing a job his father had entrusted to him, he'd panicked, desperate to replace the missing money. He made an even bigger mistake. Now, the Italians wanted to make an example out of him. Nick couldn't believe what he was hearing. Why hadn't Andrew gone to Don Moretti instead? Andrew let out a bitter laugh. His own father would have been the first person to hand him over. After failing such an important assignment, he'd already been warned his life meant nothing, overwhelmed with guilt. Andrew admitted he hated the life he'd been born into, then quietly apologized for dragging Nick into his problems, believing he had nowhere left to turn. He prepared to leave. Nick stopped him. He couldn't involve the Caponelli family directly. That would have started another war, but he also couldn't ignore someone begging for help. Tomorrow, Nick would personally contact Don Moretti, if nothing else. The mafia boss would protect his own son to preserve the family's reputation. Relief washed over Andrew's face. He thanked Nick again and again. Nick simply told him to get some rest. Tomorrow, they would figure everything out together. Hours later, the house had fallen completely silent. Nick was fast asleep, quietly. Andrew stepped into Nick's bedroom without making a sound. He opened the bedside drawer. He took Nick's handgun. Then, barely louder than a whisper, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Nick." Nick suddenly jolted awake in the middle of the night when a sharp sound echoed through the house. For For a moment he remained frozen in bed, trying to understand what he had just heard. It sounded like a gunshot. Without wasting another second, Nick rushed out of his room and headed straight for the guest room where Andrew had been staying. He threw the door open, only to find Andrew lying motionless on the floor. A gun was beside him along with his phone. Nick immediately rushed over and checked for a pulse, but there was nothing. Andrew was already dead. Yet what confused Nick even more was the phone lying beside him. The screen was still on and a paused video. Nick picked it up and pressed play. The recording showed Andrew sitting alone as he introduced himself before explaining that he had decided to take his own life. But the reason behind his decision went back only a few hours earlier, when Andrew had arrived at Nick's home desperate for help. At the time, Andrew had confessed that he had gotten himself into serious trouble with the Italian mob. Nick had told him that the safest thing to do was contact Don Moretti. If Andrew went directly to his father, Don would have a reason to protect him, even if it was only to save the family's reputation. Nick had then told Andrew to get some sleep. For Andrew, that small act of kindness had given him a little hope. After everything that had happened, he had believed that coming to Nick might actually give him a way out. But that hope disappeared when his phone suddenly received a message. Andrew opened it and found a photograph of his mother and Bella holding a baby. The image was accompanied by a chilling threat from an unknown sender. He was being forced to choose between himself and his family. The meaning was obvious. If Andrew refused to die, the Italians would kill the people he loved. His hands began trembling as he stared at the screen. For a moment, he wondered whether he should tell his father or ask Nick for help again. But Andrew quickly convinced himself that doing so would only drag more people into the situation. If his family was going to survive, then he believed there was only one option left. Andrew quietly entered Nick's room while Nick was asleep and took the gun from the drawer. Standing there with the weapon in his hands, Andrew could barely hold himself together. He apologized to Nick for getting him involved in something that had never been his problem. Then he made his final decision, but insisted that there was no other way to save the people he loved. His voice trembled as he struggled to hold back his tears. Before the recording ended, Andrew left one final request. He wanted everyone to know that he loved them very much. The video eventually ended, but the truth behind Andrew's death was only beginning to come to light. Later, Nick explained everything to Ava. Ava could hardly believe what she was hearing. Andrew had actually taken his own life, because the Italian mob had threatened his family. Nick confirmed that Andrew had been terrified and trapped in a situation he couldn't escape from, but there was another detail that made the entire situation even more suspicious. The person who had taken Andrew's phone was Don Moretti himself. Ava was stunned. Her father had never told her anything about this. As far as she knew, Andrew's death had never been connected to the Italian mob, and her father had never mentioned that he possessed Andrew's phone. Nick admitted that there had always been ugly rumors surrounding him and the incident involving Andrew. He had never bothered to clear them up because doing so would only have made Andrew look worse. But even Nick hadn't expected Ava's father to take advantage of those rumors in such a calculated way. If Nick tried to explain everything now, nobody would simply take his word for it. After all, the rumors had already shaped the way people viewed him. Ava still wasn't completely certain whether Nick was telling the truth, but the more she thought about his story, the harder it became to dismiss. If Nick had been lying, he would have had every reason to make himself look completely innocent. Instead, he had openly mentioned Andrew's phone. That phone could contain actual evidence proving whether Nick was telling the truth. But more than anything else, Ava couldn't stop thinking about Andrew's final words. He had asked Nick to tell everyone that he loved them. Those words felt exactly like something Andrew would have said. That was enough to make Ava decide that she had to find the phone. Nick immediately pointed out the problem. Neither of them knew where it was, but Ava already had an idea. There was someone who might know. Not long afterward, Ava arrived at Vincent's home and rang the doorbell. Vincent answered, clearly irritated at being disturbed so late at night, but the moment he opened the door, his expression changed completely. Nick was standing behind Ava. Vincent immediately recognized him as Nick Caponelli, and his anger exploded. He could barely believe that Nick had the nerve to show up at his home. Ava quickly stopped him before the situation could get worse. She wasn't there to start a fight. She was there because of Andrew. The three of them eventually sat down in Vincent's office, where Ava and Nick explained what had happened. Vincent listened carefully as the pieces were put together. According to the story, Andrew had taken his own life because the Italian mob had threatened his family, while Nick had become involved simply because Andrew had come to him for help. And now Don Moretti supposedly possessed the one piece of evidence that could prove the entire story. Vincent wasn't convinced. He questioned whether Ava genuinely believed Nick's version of events. But Ava wasn't claiming that she knew the truth for certain. She simply believed the story was worth investigating. Nick's explanation had been detailed, and there was something else that bothered her. Her father had seemingly swept everything connected to Andrew's death under the rug. That made Vincent pause after thinking about it. He finally revealed something Ava hadn't known. He had seen Andrew's phone before. He had personally witnessed his father putting it inside the safe. At the time, Vincent had simply assumed Don was keeping it because it had belonged to Andrew. But now knowing what the phone might contain, that memory suddenly became far more important. Ava immediately asked whether there was a way to check it. Vincent admitted that he could provide the key to the safe. But there was still one problem. Vincent warned them that they had to consider the possibility that Nick's entire story was fabricated. Nick didn't hesitate. If the evidence inside the safe proved that he had been lying, he was willing to accept the consequences then and there. As Ava walked down the hallway, her mind kept returning to everything Nick had told her, and the promise he had made back in Vincent's office. He had been so certain about his innocence that he was even willing to put his own life on the line if the phone proved him to be a liar. The memory of those words stayed with Ava as she thought about what Vincent had told her next. Her father would be leaving the house in the morning, which meant there was only a small window of time to search his office without being caught. Vincent had told Ava to go straight to Don Moretti's study. He would call their father and try to keep him away from the house for as long as possible. Meanwhile, Ava would have to find Andrew's phone and check what was stored on it. Ava had immediately worried about Nick, but Nick assured her that he would remain behind and wait for her to return. Now standing outside Don Moretti's study, Ava hesitated for a moment. She knew she couldn't simply accept Nick's story because it sounded convincing. If she wanted the truth, she needed evidence. So she reminded herself that there was only one way to settle everything. She had to check the phone. Ava carefully unlocked the door and stepped inside. The office was completely empty, leaving her free to search without anyone watching. She approached the desk and remembered Vincent's instructions. The phone should be inside the top drawer. Ava quickly inserted the key and unlocked it. The moment the drawer opened, her heart nearly stopped. There it was, Andrew's phone. Her suspicion had been correct. Her father really had kept it. She immediately picked up the phone and tried to turn it on. Nothing happened. The battery was completely dead. Ava's excitement instantly turned into panic. She needed to check the video, but the phone wouldn't even start. Fortunately, the laptop on the desk could provide a solution. Ava connected the phone to it and waited as it began charging. A small sense of relief washed over her when she saw that the phone was actually taking power. But there was another problem. How long would it take? And would the phone turn on before her father returned? Ava could only stand there anxiously watching it charge, silently hoping it would come back to life in time. Then, before she could get any answer, footsteps approached the office. Don Moretti was coming back. As Don Moretti reached the door of his study, something immediately felt wrong. He stopped for a moment, suspicious of what might be happening inside. Then he opened the door. His eyes immediately landed on Ava. She was standing near his desk. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Don Moretti's expression hardened as he demanded to know what Ava was doing inside his office. Ava quickly tried to explain that she had come to see him, but since he hadn't been there, she had been preparing to leave. Don wasn't impressed. He reminded her that she knew better than to enter his office without permission. As he walked toward her, his presence became increasingly intimidating. Ava apologized, trying to keep her composure. Don then asked what she had actually wanted to discuss with him. He already knew that Ava had left home the previous night, and his next question revealed exactly what concerned him. He wanted to know whether she had gone to see Nick Caponelli. Ava carefully avoided revealing the truth. She told him that she had gone to see Vincent because she wanted to hear exactly what had happened. And after hearing Vincent's side of the story, she claimed that everything had finally become clear. Don seemed satisfied with that answer. He assumed Ava had finally realized that his version of events was the correct one. He then told her that he would handle everything that had happened and ordered her to stay home. He clearly didn't want Ava getting involved in anything foolish, but Ava wasn't ready to leave. There was one question that had been weighing on her ever since she learned the truth about Andrew. Ava asked whether he'd ever loved Andrew. The question caught Don off guard. Instead of giving her an honest answer, he dismissed it as ridiculous. Ava wasn't surprised. She already knew that was how he would respond, so she simply accepted his answer and turned around, leaving the office without saying anything more. But the moment she stepped into the hallway, the emotions she had been holding back finally overwhelmed her. Ava collapsed onto her knees. Her mind immediately returned to Andrew. She remembered his frightened face. He had wanted them to know that he loved them. That memory shattered whatever emotional distance Ava had been trying to maintain. As tears streamed down her face, Ava wondered how Andrew could possibly have gone through everything without resenting anyone. He had been pushed to the edge by her father, and yet Ava realized that she had also played a part in what happened. She had seen the signs. She had seen how much pressure Andrew was under. But instead of recognizing how badly he was suffering, she had pretended not to notice. Andrew had every reason to hate them. Instead, he had been terrified, desperately searching for a way to protect the people he loved. The thought broke Ava's heart, but this time, she refused to simply cry and move on. She slowly stood back up, wiping away her tears as determination replaced the helplessness in her expression. Ava made a promise to Andrew. She wouldn't let him feel alone anymore. She was going to set things right. Meanwhile, back in Vincent's office, the truth was beginning to sink in for Vincent as well. He admitted that he had always known their father was harsh. Don had treated Vincent the same way, so he had simply assumed Andrew was capable of handling it, but now Vincent realized how badly he had misjudged the situation. He had never imagined that Andrew had been pushed so far that he would eventually see death as his only escape. So Ava made the decision that the truth had to become public. It had to be exposed for Andrew's sake, and it had to be exposed for Nick's sake as well. Nick, however, wasn't convinced that it would make much difference. The rumors had already spread too far, and once people had accepted a story as truth, changing their minds wouldn't be easy, but Ava refused to back down. Even if the damage couldn't be completely undone, Andrew deserved to have the truth known. Nick deserved the same, yet before Ava could take that next step, Ava asked him one question. She wanted to know whether Nick still wanted to marry her. Nick looked at her carefully, as if he needed to understand why she was asking such a serious question. Now Ava's hesitation made it clear that the answer wasn't simply about their relationship anymore. Her thoughts had already returned to Andrew, the twin brother she had once been inseparable from. For years, Ava and Andrew had shared a bond that went beyond ordinary sibling closeness. They had understood each other without needing to say much, often knowing what the other was thinking before a single word was spoken. But when Andrew needed her most, Ava had turned her back on him, and then he died. For the longest time, Ava had carried the belief that his death was somehow her fault. She couldn't escape the guilt, so instead of facing it, she buried herself in parties and destructive habits. At the same time, she allowed her father to treat her cruelly, because the pain was easier to endure than confronting what had happened to Andrew. Ava could no longer hide from that guilt. She reached out and held onto Nick's sleeve, her emotions becoming impossible to contain. Ava was deeply grateful to him. Without Nick, she might have spent the rest of her life believing that Andrew had died hating her. Tears streamed down her face as she thanked Nick for refusing to give up on her and for helping her see the truth. Nick had every reason to be hurt by her suspicion, yet he had still stayed beside her. Ava admitted that she had been afraid he might no longer want her after everything that had happened. Since meeting her, Nick's life had only become more complicated, and she feared that all the trouble surrounding her family had finally changed the way he felt about her. But Nick's response was simple. If his feelings had changed, he never would have risked his own life just to prove the truth to her. He gently kissed Ava on the forehead, reassuring her that the fact she now believed in his innocence meant more to him than anything else. But Ava wasn't satisfied with simply knowing the truth herself. She wanted everyone else to know it too. More importantly, she wanted her own family to understand that Nick had never been responsible for Andrew's death. Before they could continue the conversation, Ava stood up and opened the door. Vincent was standing on the other side. He had already contacted the rest of the family and they would be arriving soon. Vincent then stepped into the room and approached Nick. For the first time, Vincent openly apologized for what he had done on the night of Nick and Ava's engagement. Even if there had been a misunderstanding between them, Vincent admitted that he shouldn't have lost his temper or caused such a public scene. Nick didn't hold it against him. He understood that Vincent had only been trying to protect Ava, and he admitted that he probably would have reacted the same way if their positions had been reversed. But Ava still had something she wanted to know. She asked Vincent what their father had actually told him that night. Before Vincent could explain, the doorbell suddenly rang. The rest of the family had arrived. Vincent decided that whatever he had to reveal should be said in front of everyone. Bella immediately noticed the seriousness of the situation and questioned Ava about what had happened to Andrew. This time, there was no reason to hide anything. Ava finally told them the truth. She explained everything that had happened to Andrew, including the pressure he had been under, the threats against his family, his decision to take his own life, and the truth surrounding Nick's involvement. As the full story came out, the family slowly realized how badly Andrew had been suffering before his death. Bella was especially shaken. She couldn't believe that their father had accused Nick of being a murderer, despite knowing what had actually happened. The revelation made the situation even more disturbing. Vincent then explained what he believed had happened on the night of the engagement. He suspected that their father had deliberately called him into his study, because he wanted Vincent to create a scene during the engagement ceremony. Once Vincent revealed what he had been told about Nick, the rumors would naturally spread, and that was exactly what happened. Nick's reputation had been damaged before anyone even knew the truth. Bella could only sigh. She wanted to believe that their father would never manipulate the family like that. But after everything they had just learned, the plan sounded completely believable. The family now had an obvious question. Should they confront their father immediately? Ava refused. She wasn't ready to confront him yet. She needed time to understand exactly what her father was thinking, and more importantly, what he might do next. Bella worried that the rumors would continue and that people would keep believing Nick had killed Andrew. But Nick remained calm. He believed the rumors would eventually fade with time. Ava, however, knew that waiting wasn't enough. That was precisely why she needed the family's help. There was something she intended to do, but it had to happen without her father finding out. While Ava and her family were preparing for what came next, someone else was already thinking about her. Elsewhere, Alec Asnikov sat quietly, his thoughts returning to his recent encounter with Ava. The memory brought him back to the conversation he had with Ava. Ava had made it clear that if revenge was what she wanted, she intended to handle it herself. Alessandro had been waiting for Alec to explain why he had asked to meet. When Alec remained silent for too long, Alessandro grew impatient and demanded to know what had been on his mind. Alec finally broke his silence. Before discussing anything else, he wanted confirmation about Ava and Nick. He asked whether Alessandro was certain that his daughter and Nick Caponelli had completely broken up. Alessandro confirmed that he had spoken with Ava himself. According to him, Ava clearly no longer loved Nick. After everything that had happened, Alessandro believed Ava's love for her twin brother had always been stronger than her feelings for anyone else. But Alec's sudden interest in Ava's relationship made Alessandro suspicious. He wanted to know why Alec was asking. Alec didn't answer immediately. Instead, Instead, he revealed that he wanted to add one more condition to their existing agreement. Alessandro's expression changed. He asked what kind of condition Alec could possibly want to add now. Alec then made his demand. He wanted Ava Moretti included in the deal. The request completely changed the atmosphere. Alessandro immediately understood what Alec was implying. Alec wasn't simply asking to work with Ava, he wanted to marry her. Alessandro couldn't understand what had suddenly gotten into him, but Alec calmly explained that an alliance secured through marriage had begun to seem appealing. Alessandro immediately questioned whether this meant Alec didn't trust him. Alec's answer was just as controlled. In his view, there was nothing wrong with making absolutely certain that an alliance was secure. Alessandro considered the request for a moment. Surprisingly, he agreed. He had never truly intended to marry Ava off to the Caponellis anyway, so he saw no reason to reject Alec's condition. With the matter settled, Alessandro stood up and left. Alec remained alone. The room became quiet again, but his thoughts were no longer focused on the agreement. They were focused on Ava. Alec wondered whether keeping Ava close to him might finally help him understand something he couldn't explain. Why did he keep thinking about her? And as that question lingered in his mind, a dangerous new possibility began taking shape around Ava's future. Not long afterward, he held the door open as she got inside, and once they were both seated, a brief silence settled between them. Nick suddenly lowered his head onto the steering wheel, looking far more nervous than Ava had expected. Ava couldn't help but find his reaction amusing. She teased him about how nervous he seemed, especially after the awkward way he had been acting earlier. Nick admitted that the entire situation was nerve-wracking for him. Before Ava could say anything else, her phone suddenly vibrated. She looked down at the screen with a smile, but that expression disappeared almost instantly. A message from her father had arrived. He wanted her to meet him at their usual hotel restaurant at 8 that evening. The timing made Nick suspicious. He wondered whether Don Moretti had already realized that something was happening. Nick hadn't noticed anyone following them, but that didn't mean Don wasn't aware of what Ava was planning. Ava couldn't be certain either. Still, she decided that she had to go. That evening, Ava arrived at the hotel restaurant and found her father already waiting for her. Don Moretti was calmly eating his steak when she approached the table. Ava asked whether he had wanted to see her, and Don simply invited her to sit down. He had already ordered her food. For a moment, everything appeared strangely normal. Then Don revealed why he had called her there. He wanted Ava to quit school, and Don admitted that he had eventually allowed her to continue because she had been so determined. But now he made his real intentions clear. He had never intended to let her graduate. Instead, he had already found another man for her to marry. Don expected Ava to stay quietly at home until the wedding. Surprisingly, Ava didn't argue. She calmly accepted. She told her father that she would get married. Don immediately seemed pleased by her response, believing that Ava had finally decided to obey him. But before he could finish celebrating his victory, Ava revealed the part he wasn't expecting. She had already chosen the man she intended to marry. Don's expression changed instantly. He demanded to know who it was. At that exact moment, Nick walked into the restaurant and stopped behind Ava. Ava slowly stood up beside Nick. Nick placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and Ava reached up and held that hand. The rings on both of their fingers were impossible to miss. Ava then introduced Nick as her husband. Don could barely process what he had just heard, but Ava made it clear that there was no misunderstanding. She and Nick were already legally married. They had gone to the courthouse and made their marriage official without asking for Don's permission. As legal adults, they had never needed his approval in the first place. Don might try to claim that Ava had been coerced, mentally incapable of making the decision, or somehow tricked into the marriage. But Ava had already prepared for that possibility. She had evidence of the abuse she had suffered from him. Ava placed a file on the table, making it clear that she was prepared to take legal action if her father tried to challenge the marriage. Don was stunned that his own daughter was willing to threaten him with a lawsuit. His anger immediately exploded. He lashed out at Ava, calling her ungrateful and nearly losing control. But Nick stepped in before things could escalate any further. He warned Don to be careful. Nick reminded him that Don had been the one who betrayed Ava first. As her father, Don should have protected her, especially after everything she had already been through. Instead, he had manipulated her by taking advantage of her trauma. Nick's contempt for Don was unmistakable. In his eyes, a man who treated his own daughter that way had no right to call himself a father. As for the alliance between their families, Nick made it clear that Don no longer had any control over that either. If Don wanted to discuss the agreement, he could speak directly with Nick's father. Nick's father would have no problem calling the entire arrangement off. With that, Nick and Ava turned to leave. But before walking away completely, Nick delivered one final warning. If Don wanted to end the alliance, there would be a price to pay. The two of them then walked out of the restaurant, leaving Don behind with anger written across his face. Outside, Nick immediately checked on Ava. He asked whether she was okay. Ava admitted that she was, although she still couldn't believe how easily everything had gone. She wondered why she hadn't done this sooner. But Nick reminded her that what she had done hadn't been easy at all. It had taken an enormous amount of courage for Ava to stand up to her father and finally take control of her own life. The words stayed with Ava. Courage. As she looked at Nick, her thoughts drifted inward. For so long, Ava had believed that her father was the one who had locked her away. She had blamed him for keeping her trapped, controlling her choices, and making her feel powerless. But now she saw things differently. Maybe the door had been unlocked all along. Maybe she had been the one standing in front of it, too afraid to walk through. Ava finally understood that she couldn't keep living like that. She refused to be locked away anymore. And with Nick beside her, she had finally taken the first real step toward freedom. But while Ava was beginning to break free from her father's control, elsewhere, Alec confronted Don Moretti. He was clearly disappointed. Alec had expected Don to accomplish something as simple as keeping Ava under control. Yet Don had failed. Because of that failure, Alec decided there was no reason to continue following the original plan. They would have to move to the next step sooner than expected. Alec gave Don one final warning. There would be no more mistakes. One of Alec's men then suggested a simple solution. If Ava was becoming a problem, they could simply kill her. Keeping her alive only gave Moretti more time to change his mind and interfere with their plans. But Alec's response was immediate. Without hesitation, he struck the man. He made it clear that nobody had asked for his opinion. Alec was the one making the decisions, no one else. The subordinate immediately apologized and backed down. Then, outside the warehouse, another man contacted Alec's father. The situation had clearly gone far worse than expected. He believed that Alec's father would now have to stop relying on others and begin giving direct orders himself. The morning after their marriage, Ava slowly opened her eyes and found Nick already awake beside her. He greeted her with a quiet good morning, but Ava was still half asleep, and she immediately asked what time it was. Nick told her she could go back to sleep, but Ava couldn't stay in bed for long. She was supposed to meet her sisters around lunchtime to look at wedding dresses, which was exactly why she had insisted on going to sleep early the night before. Nick couldn't help but tease her about that. After all, according to him, this was their first night together as husband and wife. Ava immediately challenged him on that point. She reminded him that they had already spent the night together after their wedding. Nick simply found another way around it. That night had been their first night as a married couple, but their actual wedding night would still count as their first night together too. Before Ava could argue any further, Nick's expression turned playful. He asked what time she was supposed to meet her sisters. Ava hesitated before admitting that they were meeting around 1. That was when she realized how little time she had left. She needed to get ready, but Nick clearly wasn't in any hurry to let her leave. Then he asked the one question that immediately made Ava pause. He wanted to know whether she trusted him. Ava had no idea that trusting Nick that morning would cost her the little time she had left. By the time Ava finally arrived at the clothing store, Bella and Angie were already waiting for her and looking through bridal dress magazines. Bella immediately noticed how late Ava was. She reminded her that they had agreed to meet at 1, and Ava could only apologize, claiming that something had come up. But inside, Ava knew exactly who was responsible. She silently blamed Nick for keeping her until the last possible moment and decided that she was never trusting him again. Still, the teasing quickly disappeared once the sisters started arguing over the wedding dress. Angie believed a wedding dress should be extravagant and ornate. Bella completely disagreed. She preferred something simple and minimalistic. Before long, the two sisters were arguing back and forth over which style was better. Ava finally had enough and told them both to stop. Eventually, she tried on one of the dresses. The moment Bella saw her in it, she was convinced that the dress was perfect. She even joked that Nick was probably going to lose his mind when he saw Ava wearing it. Ava laughed and thanked her. The shopkeeper then explained that this was only the initial fitting and that the dress would look even better once the necessary alterations were finished. As Ava looked at herself in the dress, something unexpected happened. She realized that she actually liked it. Ava had never spent much time fantasizing about her wedding day. Marriage itself had never been the problem. She simply hadn't wanted to marry someone she didn't love. She secretly hoped that Nick would like the dress. Bella immediately noticed the smile on Ava's face and teased her for finally looking excited about getting married. Angie joined in by reminding Ava that she had once claimed she'd rather die than get married. Ava admitted that she had never actually been against marriage. She had simply refused to marry someone she didn't love. The problem was that everyone around her had kept pushing her toward marriage with whichever man they thought was suitable. Angie then became more serious. She admitted that if she had ever pressured Ava about marriage, it had only been because she wanted Ava to be happy. Then Angie brought up something much more painful. Andrew's death had shaken their entire family to its core. Angie explained that she, Vincent, and Bella had at least been able to turn to their own families when things became difficult. Ava hadn't had that same comfort. That was why Angie had always wanted Ava to have a home of her own. Seeing Ava genuinely happy now made Angie relieved. She was glad that Ava had finally found someone she truly wanted to build a life with. Ava was deeply moved by her sister's words. But before she could respond, something outside the store caught her attention. A car had stopped nearby, and there were armed men inside. Ava's expression changed instantly. She recognized the danger before anyone else did. Without hesitation, she shouted for everyone to get down. The warning came just in time. The armed men opened fire. Bullets tore through the area, sending everyone scrambling for cover as panic erupted around them. The peaceful afternoon had transformed into chaos in an instant. Then, just as suddenly, the shooting stopped. Elsewhere, Nick was still driving, completely unaware of what had happened. His mind was still on Ava. He remembered how annoyed she had been about being late, and despite everything, he couldn't help thinking that she had looked cute even while angry. Nick knew she was probably still upset with him, so he was already thinking about how he could make it up to her. Then his phone rang. Seeing Ava's name, Nick immediately answered. He sounded cheerful at first, expecting to hear her complaining about him making her late. But the voice on the other end wasn't Ava's. A stranger introduced himself and asked whether Nick was Ava Moretti's husband. Nick immediately became serious. He confirmed that he was and demanded to know who was calling. The man's next words completely shattered Nick's calm. calm. He told Nick that he needed to come to the hospital immediately. Ava had been caught in a shooting. She was in the emergency room. For a moment, Nick couldn't process what he had just heard. His mind went completely blank. Then fear took over. He rushed to the hospital as quickly as he could, desperately hoping that the situation wasn't as bad as it sounded. But with every step toward the emergency room, his fear only grew. Nick finally reached Ava's room. He hurried toward the bed and pulled open the curtain. Then he froze. Ava was lying motionless on the hospital bed with an IV attached to her. She was still wearing the wedding dress she had been trying on with her sisters, but the beautiful dress was now covered in blood. Nick stared at her in horror, unable to accept what he was seeing. Ava's warning came just in time, but there was no way to avoid the chaos completely. The armed men opened fire, sending bullets and shattered glass through the store as everyone desperately tried to get out of the line of fire. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shooting stopped. The attackers quickly abandoned the scene and drove away, leaving behind a terrifying silence. Ava slowly opened her eyes and tried to understand what had just happened. Her body was aching, and the shock made it difficult to think clearly. She looked around, desperately checking whether everyone else was safe. Then her eyes landed on someone lying nearby. Ava immediately crawled toward the person and tried to wake her. But when she saw the blood spreading across the woman's body, her expression changed completely. The woman wasn't responding. Ava's heart sank as the horrifying possibility entered her mind. She might already be dead. The realization brought Ava to tears. Ava immediately began screaming for help. She desperately called for someone to come, explaining that a woman had been shot and was losing a dangerous amount of blood, but for those terrifying moments, Ava could only cry and wait for someone to arrive. Eventually, everything around her began to fade. When Ava opened her eyes again, the first thing she noticed was the unfamiliar ceiling above her. Her vision was still blurry, and it took several seconds before she realized where she was. Ava slowly tried to move, but before she could get far, Nick immediately stopped her. He was sitting beside her bed, watching her closely. Nick warned her not to move because she had been injured by broken glass during the shooting and had needed several stitches. Any sudden movement could cause the wounds to open again. She asked Nick what had happened to her. Nick explained that there had been a shooting at the store and Ava had been caught in the middle of it. That was how she had ended up in the hospital. The realization immediately made Ava think about everyone else. She asked whether the others were okay. Ava specifically remembered seeing one of the employees get shot and worried that the attack might have caused serious injuries. Nick reassured her that the employee was fine and that nobody else had been badly wounded. Relief immediately washed over Ava. At least everyone had survived. But Nick didn't share that relief. His expression remained heavy, as he admitted that the situation wasn't okay for him. For a few terrifying hours, he had thought he was going to lose Ava, and in his mind, it was partly his fault. He blamed himself for letting his guard down, and more importantly, for allowing Ava to go to the dress shop without him. Nick reached for Ava's hand as his emotions finally overwhelmed him. Ava tried to reassure him that she was still there, but Nick wasn't willing to take another chance. He promised that something like this would never happen again. Whoever had ordered the attack would pay for what they had done. That immediately made Ava wonder whether the attackers had been caught. Nick admitted that they hadn't been captured yet, but he was confident it wouldn't take long. The authorities already had information about the Asnikov hideout. Ava's expression changed the moment she heard that name. The Asnikovs, she suddenly remembered Alec. Her thoughts returned to the time she had gone to him while she was angry with Nick. She remembered the way Alec had behaved around her, and the disturbing realization she had reached afterward. But before she could say anything more, pain suddenly shot through her injured body. She winced and instinctively reached toward her wound. Nick immediately noticed. He asked whether she was in pain, and Ava admitted that she believed the injury had started hurting again. Nick promised to have the hospital staff give her more pain medication. For now, there was nothing Ava needed to do except rest. He reassured her that she didn't have to worry about anything. When she woke up again, everything would be taken care of. Nick leaned down and gently kissed her before telling her to get some sleep. Ava finally stopped resisting. With Nick beside her, she allowed her eyes to close and slowly drifted back to sleep. Nick remained there for a moment, watching her rest. Then he stepped outside the room. Not long afterward, Vincent arrived and immediately asked about Ava. Nick quietly explained that she was asleep, but Nick had another concern. He wanted to know what was happening with the Asnikovs. Vincent revealed that the Asnikovs had gone completely quiet. Considering what had just happened, he had expected them to strike again while they still had the advantage. Instead, they were doing nothing. Nick immediately understood what that silence meant. If the Asnikovs weren't going to make the first move, then Nick and the Caponellis would have to make it themselves. Vincent was immediately concerned. He warned Nick that attacking the Asnikovs could turn the situation into an all-out war. And if that happened, Ava could become an even bigger target. The Asnikovs might retaliate with even greater force, but Nick wasn't backing down. He was determined to make sure the Asnikovs understood that Ava was no longer someone they could threaten without consequences. Nick promised that he would make certain they never even considered targeting Ava again. He wasn't going going to allow anyone to mess with his wife. Meanwhile, at the Asnikov warehouse, the situation was very different. Alex stood surrounded by the aftermath of the attack. His men were dead. He was furious with his father. He demanded to know why his father had interfered. Alec believed he could have handled everything himself, but his father had stepped in and undermined him in front of his own men. Everything had been going smoothly with the Morettis. Alec had been carefully managing the situation, and now his father had suddenly changed the entire plan by ordering an attack on Ava. Then his father's voice came through the phone. He had already heard that Ava had survived. For a brief moment, Alec froze. His father pointed out that Alec must be relieved. After all, it was obvious that Alec had developed an interest in Ava, but Alec immediately rejected the idea. He insisted that he didn't become attached to women. According to Alec, Ava had only ever been a temporary distraction, nothing more. His father didn't believe him. Instead, he calmly challenged Alec to prove it. If Ava really meant nothing to him, then bringing her back dead shouldn't be a problem. Then his father explained the larger plan. The attack was designed to create suspicion between the Morettis and the Caponellis. The Morettis would believe the Caponellis had attacked Ava. The Caponellis would naturally believe the Morettis were responsible. And once both families turned against each other, they would eventually destroy one another. That was when the Asnikovs would move in and take everything for themselves. Alec's father gave him one final warning before ending the call. He couldn't afford another disappointment. The phone went silent, but there was nothing amused about his expression. Alec suddenly threw the phone to the ground, smashing it apart. His mind returned to Ava. He remembered the moment he had seen her cry in front of him. That memory had never truly left him. And now, despite everything he had just told his father, the idea of bringing Ava back dead clearly disturbed him. Alec stood alone in the warehouse, his anger building as he struggled against emotions. A few days had passed since the shooting. She sat quietly while the police finished asking a few final questions about the attack. The officer thanked Ava for cooperating and assured her that they would let her know if there was any progress in the investigation. Nick thanked the officer as well, and everything seemed calm until the officer accidentally knocked into a desk while leaving. The sudden noise made Ava flinch. For a brief moment, her entire body tensed as the memory of the shooting came rushing back. Nick immediately noticed. He could see that Ava was still trembling, even though she tried to hide it. When he gently asked whether she was okay, Ava brushed it off as nothing more than being startled. After spending several days trapped inside the hospital, Ava was desperate to leave. She told Nick that she couldn't wait to get out and finally breathe some fresh air. Nick agreed, but as they left the hospital, he couldn't stop worrying about her. The shooting was over, but Ava was still carrying the fear of what had happened. Once they were inside the car, Nick noticed that Ava remained unusually quiet. Her expression was still troubled, and he could tell that something was bothering her. He gently asked whether she was really okay. Ava finally admitted what had been going through her mind. She kept replaying the shooting over and over again. No matter how hard she tried to push the memory away, she couldn't escape it, and the sight of people getting hurt continued playing in her head. Nick wasn't surprised. What Ava had experienced had been traumatic, and he knew that recovering from something like that wouldn't happen overnight. She needed time before the fear would finally begin to fade. Ava listened carefully before noticing something in the way Nick spoke. It sounded like he knew exactly what she was going through. She quietly wondered whether Nick had ever experienced something similar himself. Nick could have denied it, but he couldn't lie to her. He admitted that he had. Even when the people involved were criminals who deserved to die, actually seeing someone die could still haunt a person for a long time. Knowing that someone deserved their fate didn't make watching them die any easier. The realization made Ava look at Nick differently. She suddenly wondered how many times he had been forced to experience something like that. Ava quietly acknowledged that it must have been difficult for him. Nick simply looked at her and reassured her that she didn't need to worry about him. Right now, Ava was the one who needed to focus on healing. He encouraged her to get some sleep and reminded her that she would probably feel much better after resting. Then Ava looked out the window. Something didn't seem right. The road they were taking wasn't the route to Nick's home. Ava immediately pointed this out, wondering where they were actually going. Nick calmly admitted that they weren't heading home. Instead, he had something else planned. Nick explained that he had originally planned to take her somewhere so she could get some fresh air, but after everything that had happened, he thought this was the perfect opportunity. Still trying to understand what he meant. But when the car finally arrived at the destination, Ava found herself standing on a private tarmac. A jet was waiting for them. She looked at Nick in disbelief. Nick saw her reaction and simply explained that if they were going to do it, they might as well go all out. Ava couldn't believe how suddenly everything had happened. She still had school to attend. She hadn't even told her family that she was leaving. Before she could continue protesting, Nick suddenly picked her up and began carrying her toward the stairs of the jet. Ava immediately demanded that he put her down. Nick refused to let her worry. He assured her that he would contact everyone for her. All Ava needed to do was relax. But there was still one question she desperately wanted answered. Where exactly were they going? Nick casually named the destination, St. Lucia. Ava froze. St. Lucia was in the Caribbean. That meant Nick wasn't simply taking her somewhere nearby. spy. He was taking her out of the country. Ava immediately pointed out that she didn't even have her passport. Nick had already thought of that. He revealed that he had brought it with him, along with everything else they might need. Anything they had forgotten could simply be purchased once they arrived. Then Nick reminded Ava of something important. They were married now, yet they still hadn't taken a proper vacation together. He gently set Ava down in a seat and explained that this trip was meant to give her some much-needed rest. Ava couldn't completely argue with that. Still, she wanted to contact her family herself. She didn't want them worrying when they suddenly realized she had disappeared. Nick agreed. While Ava took out her phone to contact her family, Nick settled into the seat beside her and prepared to contact her school. Everything seemed peaceful for a moment. Then Nick suddenly stopped. He was about to make the call when his expression changed. He slowly stood up, looking much more serious than before. Ava immediately noticed. She asked whether something was wrong. Nick quickly reassured her that nothing was happening. He claimed that for a second. He had thought he had forgotten to bring something, but he had it after all. Ava accepted the explanation. The pilot announced that the jet would soon be taking off and instructed them to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. The aircraft began its journey. Nick remained unusually tense, gripping the seat tightly as the plane took off. Eventually, the trip brought them to a completely different world. When Ava stepped outside, she found herself standing in front of a beautiful villa. She looked around in surprise before asking whether the property belonged to the Caponelli family. Nick explained that the villa had been built a long time ago and belonged to his family. He then encouraged Ava to go inside, get changed, and prepare for dinner. Ava agreed and walked into the villa. The moment she disappeared inside, Nick's relaxed expression vanished. He immediately contacted Leo and Jane. Nick wanted an explanation for a message they had sent him. Leo quickly clarified the situation. Their investigation had uncovered something troubling. Don Moretti appeared to have been secretly meeting with the Asnikovs. They still didn't have solid evidence proving exactly what those meetings meant. More importantly, Don's possible relationship with the Asnikovs could mean that he was somehow connected to the shooting. Nick's expression hardened. Nick immediately ordered Leo to contact Vincent. If anyone could get information out of Don Moretti, it was Vincent. At the same time, Leo was instructed to continue digging into the Asnikovs, but Nick made one thing very clear. Ava couldn't know anything about this investigation.